This episode is brought to you by Companion. Iris and Josh seem like the perfect match, but when a weekend getaway turns into a nightmare, Iris realizes that things aren't as perfect as they appear. From the creators of Barbarian and the studio that brought you The Notebook comes a twisted tale of modern romance and the sweet satisfaction of revenge. Companion, only in theaters January 31st. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
We
are
cultivate.
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 We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and joining me today is not my sister and co-host, Maddie Stengel, but instead I will be talking to Josh Scott. Now, Josh runs Redbeard's Relics on Instagram, which is a page dedicated to sharing amazing relics of history and the stories they hold, one of which he will be sharing with us on the show. And many of the items he shares can be purchased on his website, CommodoreCoins.com. And because it says on your PodMatch profile that you've always been passionate about history. So let's kind of start there. What got you passionate about history?
Oh, man. Well, it had to have started back when I was a kid. And my grandfather, when he was still alive, he had served in World War II. And when he got out, he got really big into coin collecting. And a lot of people in that generation coming back from World War II got into hobbies and collecting.
Yep.
And that's when sports cards became a big thing. And so I decided, well, my dad is doing it too with my grandfather. Well, why don't I check it out? And
Mm-hmm.
it really started with opening up that can of worms of, okay, I got a bunch of coins in my pocket from the grocery store or from 7-Eleven. Well, what does all this mean? It's, money is a concept, but as a 10-year-old kid, you don't really know anything. So
Yep.
it quickly turned into, okay, let me learn about this. And what do all the people on these mean? And what does all the symbols mean on money? And then it goes into just, oh my gosh, it hasn't always looked like this. George Washington wasn't always on a quarter.
Yep.
And it goes back in time, and let's see how far back it goes. And then when you get to the very first coins minted by the United States, well, then what came before that? Well, before we were a country, what existed? And there's a great book that I found called The Red Book. And that is the book that pretty much every coin collector has heard of it or has one. And the first coin in that book is not an American coin, it's a Spanish coin. And the Spanish coins are what we get our dollar from. We based it on Spanish currency. And the pillars and waves design that's on there has two pillars that represent the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar.
Mm-hmm.
There's a wrapping around it that says plus ultra, translating to more beyond. And that is where we get our dollar sign. And so learning about where all this came from, I said, oh my gosh, okay, well, if this is where we started and those coins were accepted in the United States until the 1840s as currency,
Wow.
what goes back even before that? And then I found pirates and pirate currency and everything that went with that. So then about that time is when Pirates of the Caribbean movies came out. And
Sure.
as a kid, I remember going to the movie theaters and seeing that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I know this is fake, but this is based on truth. So where does it separate? And
Mm-hmm.
it quickly leaned me into finding, okay, I can actually start owning these pieces, and I can now find all the intricacies and how long these things went back. And oh my gosh, the Spanish have been minting coins in Mexico since the 1530s. And just to show you, I have a piece of 8 right here, minted in Mexico in 1620s. And so
Nice.
getting to put your hand on actual treasure,
Mm-hmm.
I can't really fully express the excitement that like the first time I ever got one. And it just opened up so many more stories. Oh my gosh, now the coins connect me with all the treasures. So from there, it quickly turned into, I quit my old job, quit the corporate life, and I said, let me go full into developing a whole personality, a whole business around relics, and treasures. So once I started finding pieces that were so exciting, like the books, the maps, real treasure chests, swords,
Mm-hmm.
flintlocks, I have a passion for keys, so I collect a lot of old keys. All of that started opening all these like little branches. Like if you've ever done Ancestry DNA and you
Yep.
start clicking on those little leaves and you start following it, it opens all these stories. And I just decided there's too much history out there that we never learned in our
Mm-hmm.
history books across the US. We're only taught certain curriculum. Well, where can I go now?
Yep.
And it really has led me to the point where the only books that I can find that I need haven't been printed since the 1800s. And they're usually in French or they're in Dutch. And I'm having to fully translate these things. And AI is a wonderful tool because it's helped me translate entire books from Dutch or French that haven't been printed since the 1850s.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone down whole new rabbit holes. I'm a big fan of anything with skulls and crossbones, memento mori, all of that. And most of these new tokens that I've been finding that came out of the Netherlands, those symbols were originally used by the church, but were adopted by pirates and put on their flags. And that's where we get the skull and
Sure.
bones. So it all just kind of connected together. And now I'm here getting to share to you some really fun, different stories about legalized crime in the eyes of England and getting to explore that.
That's so awesome. Why? Okay. Why is it called a piece of eight?
That is a great question. And most people have no idea. It's the weirdest term for something.
Mm-hmm.
But the best way to describe it is the coins, the largest denomination, this one that I'm holding right here. This is what's known as an 8 real or 8 reals. And that is Spanish for royal. And it's an 8. So that is the largest denomination that they minted for circulation. And it is equivalent to 1 ounce of silver at the time. Since then, our kind of determination of an ounce is more grams than it was back then,
Mm-hmm.
and a piece of 8 could be cut into 8 pieces to make
Okay.
change. So if you didn't have exact change but you had one of these, and let's say you went to the local tavern and you were getting dinner, well, they would cut this in half and then cut that half in half, and now you have a fourth. There you go. You have a 2 real now, essentially, and that would pay your way. This would be the equivalent of about a month's pay at the time.
Oh,
A
okay.
single 8 real. So a piece of 8. Now imagine the pirates seeking after these things. You come across a ship that's got 10,000 of these,
Oh
you're
God. Yeah.
unbelievably wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Most Spanish galleons would keep close to 1 million of them on their ships, and so many were lost in the ocean and or were captured by pirates, washed ashore. So there's a lot of treasure floating around there, but this would change your life if even if you found a small bag of these. So it was quite powerful. So everyone was really looking for that, and that became the world standard at the time was Spanish silver. I think at up until about the mid 1700s, Spanish silver dominated about 25 to 30% of the market for the entire world of silver
Wow.
coins. So people would melt them down later to make their own currency because there was so much of this stuff coming around. But
Mm-hmm.
it's truly amazing. You don't fully get this full grasp of what the new world had until you start looking into what we're going to talk about today at the very beginning of the, I guess you could call it the silver and gold fever that captivated the world. So,
Sure. That is the perfect segue. So I'm gonna kind of like push the mic more towards you so you can tell our listeners about what you brought to like talk about and share with us.
absolutely. Well, today I have this wonderful little book. I picked this up at auction in England about a year ago, and I purposely haven't put it for sale because I love a good book. And if you've ever opened a really old book, they kind of have that good book smell.
Yes.
This is like the most seasoned book smell you've ever smelled. And so I really enjoy looking at this, reading over these old accounts. This edition of this book is from the late 1600s, around 1696, and it is called The English Hero, or Sir Francis Drake Revived, being a full account of the dangerous voyages, admirable adventures, notable discoveries, and magnanimous achievements of that valiant and renowned commander. The longest title of any book I've ever seen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's broken into 4 different sections, and it really kind of covers his whole life. So it's just a biography that was constantly circulated around England. for a number of reasons. One, super fun story. Who doesn't like this tale of adventure? And it's one of those earliest true English adventure tales of exploration. And
Sure.
this is coming at the very end of the 16th century, leading into the 17th, which throughout the 17th century is England pretty much was always on the coattails following behind Spain.
Sure.
Spain led the charge and they were the biggest, the strongest, the meanest, and they took everything over control, followed by the Portuguese. And England kind of just picked up the American colonies and some of the Caribbean. And that quickly changed over the years. But this is the perfect account to talk about privateers. And that's what he was. Now, if you've never heard of that term, or maybe heard of it and don't really know what it is, a privateer was a legalized pirate
Mm-hmm.
that it was given special paperwork and was given authority by the monarchy of England to go hunt down any enemy that they tell you can hunt. So, in this case, England wanted to get in on some of the treasure. So,
Sure.
they said, hunt down any Spanish galleon you can find, take no prisoners, and take all their treasure and bring it back. So, that's what he did. It's a really cool story that you really get to see all the ups and downs of him. And even without this book, because this mostly just touches on all the exciting stuff, but
Sure.
he does have a dark past to the beginning of it. He, as a young boy, grew up kind of around the docks and areas of the waterways of England, and
Sure.
quickly joined in with a cousin or a second cousin to basically join on a merchant slash slave ship. And it was known as one
Sure.
of the first slave ships. And this is a real, dark time. Fortunately, England was one of the first countries to outlaw slavery, and actually in England. So it was very
Mm-hmm.
short lived. I believe by the mid 1600s, all of that was gone. But that's kind of where he started. And they were part of this, kind of pirates, kind of merchants, slave traders.
Yep.
And they were part of a whole group of ships. Most of them got destroyed when when they tried going against the Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, he really decided, I'm going to crush these guys with everything I have in me because they almost killed me. I'm going to see what I can do to actually do this for a job. And
Yeah.
he really did. And he makes several voyages back and forth across the Atlantic to the New World. And I believe, yeah, I have a note here. I put down some fun facts.
Nice.
By 1572, he made his way down to the Isthmus of Panama. So you have that real thin stretch of land that's kind of barely connecting Central and South America.
Sure.
And there's a tale that he climbed up this tree because some of his crew said, you have to see this, and looked out over the horizon and saw the Pacific Ocean, which very few people from Europe in that part of the world had ever seen before. And he immediately knew, I need to go and see the rest of this world. And he ultimately managed to circumnavigate the globe. And because of that, by the time he made it back to England, Queen Elizabeth I knighted him, turned him into a sir, and then basically offered him those documents to say, hey, go and do whatever you got to do. Bring us back as much as you can. And he really was the ideal pirate. One of the coolest things that I have to say about this is to really put into perspective how much treasure was being found, because everybody gets excited about pirates and treasure. I don't care who you are. It all sounds cool.
Yeah.
All of this, all the adventures that he goes, he sacks and destroys Spanish forts and settlements all over Central and South America. He's almost unable to be captured because every time they take a place, they take their supplies, their weaponry, all of that, and they go to the next one, or they capture their ships. Now you have more ships, and he
Yep.
builds this entire enterprise. Well, at one point in 1572, when he was down there and he made his way over to Panama, there was a town, an area called Nombre de Dios in the West Indies, is where they called that whole area.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to come across one of these forts, and on the beach, they saw a pile of silver bars, 70 feet long, 10 feet high, or 10 feet wide, and 12 feet high. Now, these aren't silver bars like you would imagine today, like something maybe the size of like like an ice cream sandwich. These are
Sure.
silver bars that are 90 pounds each.
Wow.
And for something 70 feet long, 10 feet wide, and 12 feet high, The Spanish would take these, fill the bottoms of their vessels with it, and almost act as ballast to keep the ships afloat, and be
Sure.
sending this back to Spain as fast as they could to melt it down, make new coins, and spread the wealth around the world. That
Mm-hmm.
fueled the Spanish war machine.
Mm-hmm.
Most of this silver was coming from a specific town in Bolivia known as Potosi. Now, Potosi is still there today. It's a small mining town at this point, nothing like it was in its heyday. But down around this time in the 1560s, 1570s, they discovered the mountain of silver, and
Okay.
a literal mountain that I believe the numbers were something like they got 200,000 tons of silver a year out of this
Holy
place.
crap.
It was, the numbers vary. There's no true way to know exactly how much, but they can tell by a lot of shipments. They could see how
Mm-hmm.
much was coming out. So much silver. And there was a mercury, naturally forming mercury deposit nearby, which helped them extract the ore. They would crush everything down into really fine powder, extract the silver, make coins and bars. That they produced more silver than anywhere in the world up until recent years that's ever been happening. So they would make it in these large bars, put them on the backs of llamas or alpacas and
Mm-hmm.
donkeys, make it down to the coast onto ships. And now Bolivia down in South America, they would have to go down to the coast all the way up to Panama to the isthmus there, then put them on more donkeys or horses, take them up and over the land to the other side. Who
Sure.
knows how much got lost in the jungles along the way, but the
Yep.
majority of it was making it through. So it was really interesting. You've seen this. Its treasure was far more than pieces of eight and doubloons. It was massive honking bars of silver that was very difficult for one person to pick up and walk away with. So it's kind of cool. Now it kind of helps paint a little of that picture. What were they
Yeah.
looking for? That's what they were looking for. So,
Yeah.
and over these years, like in the last probably 15 years, there's famous video games have come out where, like Uncharted is, and the movie that came out recently too, we're talking about Sir Francis Drake and his treasure and a map. Well, there's no one truly knows where they would have hid their treasure, because a lot of these guys would, without explicitly ever saying it to an official report, oh, we hid our treasure on this island. They would hide things along the way, like, we're going to come back, we'll come to it later. Well, we don't know how much he kept there and hid. Actually quite a few stories of people just stumbling upon stuff after a rainstorm washes away this hillside. Suddenly there's coins and gold and things everywhere. Recently, I think in the last 30-40 years, something like that happened in Colombia. Somebody stumbled upon hundreds of gold doubloons, 2 escudos, in the river, like in
Oh
this
my
like
God.
pool. So somebody must have stored them down in this river. Like, no one's ever going to dive down and look for this. I'll come get it later. That person probably never made it back, and they somehow washed up after a storm. Gold everywhere. So we don't know truly how much is out there, but there are a few pieces that made it back from Sir Francis Drake that kind of helps us start putting together that story. So one relic that I specialize in are antique treasure chests, known as Armada chests. They were made by the Germans throughout the 1600s and late 1500s, and they were made of solid iron, all worked by hand, riveted, and have large iron keys. These
Sure.
chests were made to be so you could not break into them, and they were very difficult. The lock mechanism is super intricate. Most of them never left Europe, but I have quite a few of them now. They weigh about 250 pounds empty. So imagine
God.
filling them up with treasure. And they would paint the outside with beautiful scenes of flowers or nature or boats. Well, I believe that the Smithsonian has it, they actually have the chest that Sir Francis Drake owned and took it on his voyages. It's in the
Wow.
museum. And there's a wonderful video. If you look it up on YouTube, I believe it's on there. This woman, who's one of the conservationists, because they lost the key, nobody knew how to open it. Well, she found a way to scan it, make a replica key, opened it up, and there was nothing inside. But
Ah.
still, that excitement about what could have been inside
Yeah.
was really riveting. So that's kind of where we really start painting the picture of this name a lot of us have heard of, the explorer Sir Francis Drake. Oh, he was way more than that.
Yeah.
Legalized pirate adventurer. On the gruesome side, he was started as a slave trader and a murderer. But
Yep.
funny how, history is always aligned with the victors and the people who say it loud enough. History is what they determine it to be. When we start looking deeper, we get to really start seeing who these people really were.
Hmm.
Now, something that's really interesting is by the time he goes and is hopping from island to island to island, conquering that whole area, he gets sick. And if you've ever played the famous game Oregon Trail,
Yep.
you pull a card that says you died of dysentery. Well, that's what
Yep.
happened to him. Um,
Oh God.
yeah, he lived this extravagant life, and at the age of 56, he gets dysentery and dies at sea. Then everybody wonders what happened to him. Well, the official account is that he was placed in a lead coffin and dumped over the ship in a ceremony. Most people, when you died at sea, they weren't going to keep your body on board, so they
Yep.
wrapped you up and threw you overboard. Well, they still to this day have never found that lead coffin, and something like that wouldn't totally disintegrate in the sea. So there's been speculation. Did he truly die and get thrown into the sea? And they say, well, he's gone. Or did he disappear and live somewhere else and
Yeah.
didn't ever want to come back? Which, if you found as much treasure as he did and plundered an entire world power's wealth, I would slip away into obscurity too.
Yeah. No kidding. I mean, they're not going to just sit there and be like, "Yeah, it's okay that you stole all that money from us." Like there's going to be a price on your head.
You would be hunted to the end of your days. And
Yep.
so a lot of these big pirates over the years, well, vast majority of them were caught and, unalived. But
Yep.
for the most part, we hear stories that they slipped away into obscurity. They
Hmm.
don't tell anybody who it is, and in the middle of the night they hop on a small ship, they disguise themselves, they slip away and find their way back to their stash that they've hidden somewhere. So I like to think that he slipped away in obscurity, wound up living on a beach in Colombia somewhere, and never was heard from again. But I mean, I also do believe in a lot of the history stories, so it's very likely he did end up passing away that way. They put him in a lead coffin and threw him overboard. But if that's true, all my brain goes crazy. Like, did he have a map to any of his stuff? What did they put in his coffin with him? What
Hmm.
happened to everybody who knew about where all the treasures were? And you can't tell me that
Yep.
all the members of his crew, anytime they went to a new port, weren't stashing treasure somewhere for later and
Yep.
just never made it back. So it's just for somebody who had legalized crime and got to live the high life, travel the entire world. Actually was one of the few and first people to go down the entire west coast of America. He even stopped in California at one point and could have hid treasure there because they restocked and repaired their ships, made their way all the way back around. I mean, you could go on and on making up stories like for that, make fun
Yep.
fan fiction for all of those exploits. So
Exactly.
yeah, I get excited about, the possibilities that are out there because the stories you do end up learning about this era, they're so vast and so rich of excitement and adventure that I don't know why they aren't making more movies about this stuff.
Yeah. Seriously. You bring up this good point about like just how large these bars of silver were. So what at the time that he was privateering, what types of ships would he have been sailing on? Because I know depending on where you are in history, it's either like a smaller ship or it's a huge ship. So where did his
Yeah.
fall?
Well, the ships that he would have been sailing on they all roughly had a similar shape, but if you imagine something that's a little bigger than if in your mind you think of, in grade school we always saw Columbus coming across the new world, these weird kind of looking almost curved ships with big
Sure.
masts and big sails. They'd be something like that. They call them a galleon. They're a larger vessel. The Spanish then ultimately made the biggest ones. They called them man of war, and they would go in large groups called flotillas. And
Hmm.
essentially, he, with one ship, grew it into many. And once you have a fleet behind you, you can really do anything. And that's the kind of ship you would have. Now, in the belly of these ships, to keep the ship upright, you would fill it with ballast. And most often, these are big round stones or some really heavy rocks, and they would load up the bottom of the ship so that way it kept it, buoyant.
Hmm.
Well, when you start pulling up this much treasure, you start dumping those ballast stones left and right and replacing them with silver bars that are infinitely heavier and having to
Sure.
shore up the hull so you could store all of that. So that's kind of what he was looking at. These ships would have multiple decks. Every single ship was different, but a lot of them would have 3 or 4 or more decks. So you would go below deck, you would have your maybe 2 different decks of cannons. You would have an entire area where there was the sleeping, living quarters, galley for making all the food, and then you'd have the captain's quarters. And if it was a military vessel, you would have officers' quarters and things of that nature. But these ships would be nowhere near the size of something you would see today. Probably, if you would imagine like one of these mega yachts owned by billionaires, it'd be close in hull size to something like that, but manned by hundreds of people. So,
Hmm.
and just imagine the smells
Oh,
and the
yeah.
sights. Just not great.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm going to kind of go back to some questions that I wrote for you.
Of course.
You operate Commodore Coins and Collectibles with your father, Sean Scott,
I do.
that specializes in like shipwreck coins and maps and treasure chests and armor and things of that nature. Is that something that your father had been doing before and then you kind of joined the family business, or how did that come about?
Oh man, that came up mostly as we were doing this for fun and we were
Yep.
going to shows around the country, and we had collected US coins for so long, and I kind of lost my passion for that and wanted
Sure.
to get into an area that was more rich in history that I had a passion for. So we sold off all that stuff and we're like, well, let's do our research. So we hit the books, and I find myself buying more books than I actually buy treasure because I want to know what's real. And there's a lot of
Yep.
fakes out there. So when we started doing this together, we sat down and said, well, what if we turn this into a business? Like, I think,
Hmm.
my father has been an entrepreneur his whole life, just like my grandfather and I myself. And so we said, well, if we can make it work, we're going to do it. And we
Hmm.
have. And so over the last 10 years, we've really turned this into quite the powerhouse of collecting. And we have clients all over the world. We're really one of only a couple people here on the West Coast that's dealing in this stuff, because a majority of it is still highly collected and done in Florida, where still to this day you can metal detect on the beaches north of Miami and find treasure that washes up on the beach.
That is so crazy that that's still something that like you can just find on the beach,
Yeah.
like outside of a city in Florida. Like,
Yeah. If you've ever heard of the Treasure Coast of Florida, that's why. There's this whole many miles stretch on the eastern side of the state, on the Atlantic side, that the Spanish galleons, when they would leave Acapulco, Mexico, they would stop in Havana, going through the Gulf, and then they would go up Florida and then cut straight across to Spain. That was the closest route. Well, they usually would get a little too excited and try and go cut time, and they would go through hurricane season. And the winds were
mm,
great until they weren't,
yep.
and they would wreck and they would be forcibly blown into the coast. And the famous 1715 treasure fleet that left Havana, Cuba, all of them sunk off the coast, spilling millions and millions of dollars in today's value worth of silver, gold, emeralds, gemstones, jewelry scattered along the coast. And still to this day, they are salvaging treasure from that wreck that is more and more uncovered every single year by hurricanes. And you can metal detect and find big gold doubloons that are worth 10, 20, $50,000 on the sand.
That's insane. Talk about your
And
piece of eight.
yeah,
Like, I mean,
yeah,
seriously, that's what it would be today. Like,
yeah.
that could set you up. I'm in the wrong state, apparently.
Yeah. So when it started with finding all those stories and realizing I can actually own some of this treasure, and more than that, I can tell the stories behind it. Get someone like yourself or some complete stranger in another country who's always like the idea of pirates, but never knowing you could own a piece of treasure from that time period. I tell you the story. I go into depth about why this is so interesting. I haven't met someone yet who hasn't been interested in at least like wanting to put their hands on it. Like, If
Yeah.
you knew nothing about coins and you don't care at all, I put a piece of 8, a treasure coin in your hand, suddenly you're like, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, you're like, that's pretty cool.
Exactly. The one I have on my desk, this is like a $500 coin. And something like that is, that sounds like a lot of money, but in this world of this kind of stuff that's kind of on the low end, I've had
Sure.
examples that go well into the tens and 20s and $30,000 that there's people who collect that stuff, and I am
Yep.
happy to oblige and find it and navigate that, to tell those stories, because I see myself as a custodian of history and a steward of knowledge from this period, and I always try and tell the story first, share the history, and then if
Hmm.
you want to buy it, cool. But I'm never going to force a sale on anyone. And at the end of the day, if you didn't like what I was talking about, that's okay. It's just a matter of time until I could find something that you did like. If you didn't
Yep.
like this era of history and you were more interested in like early America, I can find something for that. And that's what's
Yep.
neat about coins. And why we started our company is because there is a coin or a piece of treasure or a relic from some time period that I have or can get that almost anybody can relate to and like. You'd be
Hmm.
surprised. I can find stuff you never knew existed, and most museums don't have or don't care to have, but I can get it. And so I pride myself on telling those stories, doing hundreds of hours of research to find the coolest stuff and to tell those stories.
I didn't write this question down, but now I'm very
Yeah.
curious. So, what was your first? Because you mentioned like shipwrecks and stuff. So, where's like the first place you went to actually find some of the treasures that you sell?
Yeah, well, the first place had always been my go-to show. Now, you can go, there's coin shows in pretty much every town or city across the US. There are a few that really stand out and are big shows. And what's nice is a lot of these dealers and these people who've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 years, a lot of them are very open to educating. They like imagine like if you were to go to old folks home and you were to sit down, because majority of these dealers are over 60,
Yep.
they want to tell you what they know. They have so
Yep.
much knowledge in there. And so they want to educate you. And then if you want to buy something, oftentimes they'll get you kind of help you get started. So the very first coin I ever bought, I thought I had it here on my desk. I don't. It's a 2 real from Mexico, which is the third smallest size. So they started with a half real, which is about the size of a dime. Then they
Okay.
go to up a 1 real, about the size of a nickel, and a 2 real is about the size typically of a quarter.
Sure.
And I found one of them after I'd been doing all this research. I'm like, okay, I gotta find one. I know the reals, and I knew that they also had an interesting name known as a cob, COB, like corn on the cob. And
Hmm.
they were called that because most people agree that it stands for Cabo de Barra. So, end of the bar. And
Okay.
what that means is because the silver coins were minted out of really thin, long silver, basically blanks. They would make like a long, thin stick, I guess. Like imagine a drum, like a stick for playing the drums. You
Sure.
take one of those, and that's made of silver. They would cut those into the right pieces. They would weigh it, make sure that's the right amount of silver, heat it up, get it into like a blob, and then strike it. You would have a piece that you would hold kind of like a cylinder. Imagine like, let's just say it's like the size of like a little smaller than a like a Red Bull can or a soda can.
Sure.
That would have one side of the coin on it, and then they would have a flat, almost like an anvil, that would have the other side of the coin. They'd put the blank that had been heated and is ready to be struck. They would take the other piece here, take a hammer in the other hand, hit it, and it would stamp the coin. So what's nice is every single one of these coins looks different. You'll never find two that look the same because the silver was all just kind of formed in its organic way, and when you strike it really hard, sometimes it cracks, sometimes it just splits off in a weird way, and you get really fun different wonky little shapes. They're never perfectly circular, not until much later.
That's
So
really
that's kind of where I found my first one, was at a big show. It's called the Long Beach Expo in Long Beach, California, in the at the port of Long Beach in Los Angeles. And so that was the kind of our local show. It was a couple hours away from us, and we would
cool.
go up there, and I found one, and I'll never sell it. It's probably one of the worst examples I've ever seen, but it was the first one I ever bought, and I'll never sell it. And it's something I'll just, give to my daughter and, kind of keep passing that down. But that's what really kickstarted it. And from there, I saved up every extra dollar I could to buy the treasure. And then I started flipping it. I bought it for 100, flipped it for 250, took that profit, rolled it to the next one, and it kept
Sure.
growing and growing and growing. And when you do your research and you look into history and you can really start connecting the dots, you can build a market around anything. And
Hmm.
I just got really fortunate to start finding these history stories I could line things up with. Great example is in the 1740s, there was a horrific earthquake that hit Lima, Peru. It destroyed the mint. So any coins minted around the mid 1700s, 1740s to 1750s are very hard to find. So when you do find them, they demand a premium, and I connect that story. Now you know why you don't see them is because of this historical event. I build up the hype. Someone has to have it. They buy it, and on to the next story.
Well, then
So,
knowing that too, like, how difficult is it to be able to tell if something is a fake?
well, it was really difficult for me to start with. It's how can you tell something's fake when every single one is different?
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
I've seen thousands of them at this point, and I know what they look like and how to kind of be like, okay, they all have a weird shape. They're all supposed to have this, and this. But beyond just knowing it has a funky little shape and it's a blob of silver and it has some kind of cross on the back and it has a shield design on the front,
Hmm.
how do we go deeper? Well, I had to start getting all these books that told me from year to year, every single mint across the New World and the Old had a person known as an assayer, and they would do that's the person in charge of the mint, doing basically quality control and
Sure.
designing of the new year's designs. So it wouldn't be every year they would make new coin designs. It might be 10 years, it might be 30 years, they might do a huge jump, but they would make sure that things are flowing smoothly, making sure that all the coins leaving are supposed to weigh exactly the same amount, that there was nothing underweight, that there was no any other kind of fraud, and that all of the information is supposed to be on the coin. Now, the original dies, the actual, basically the I'll just call it the cookie cutter to make it
Sure.
look like the design you want, they would get damaged over time because you're hitting metal on metal, and they would
Yep.
rust. And so you could start seeing how they kind of degrade over time, and then they would make a new one because they would, have to do something new. So on all of these, I can tell from looking at official pieces that are proven real. You can see that, okay, they're supposed to have a castle and a lion on the back in the four quadrants, let's just say, of Mexico. Every different mint was different, and I won't blabber you off on all the
Sure.
intricacies of everything. But let's just, to keep it simple, you want to be looking to make sure the symbols are correct on the coin. Then I look at the edges. If there's a thin edge in the middle, that means that there's some kind of, it's been cast. Like if you ever seen those videos where somebody like takes like a, I don't know, like a, let's just say a knife, and they place it in dirt or clay, and then they pour copper into it and it gets the mold of it. That is cast. That is something that you pressed a real coin into, press it into a sand, make a mold, and they poured silver or some kind of metal in there to make it look real. And granted, it will look real, but you'll see that thin line, casting line around the edges.
Sure.
These coins do not have that, and that is the first giveaway. Second, they shouldn't be magnetic. Silver is not magnetic, and if it is, that probably means that it's got some kind of other alloy metal within it that's
Sure.
making it magnet. Then you have to check the weight. The coins are supposed to have a variance on gram weight. So a true full weighted piece of eight is supposed to weigh somewhere between 26 and a half and about 27.3 grams. There's a few grams of grace in that
Sure.
range, but they're all supposed to weigh around that. And then a 4 real below that, or piece of four, is supposed to be half that. So about 13.3. And then half of that, all the way down the line. So those are really the biggest kind of takeaways. If it weighs right, it's good. But that can also be a false positive because people would cut these coins for change. So you have to be looking for that. And if it has been cut for change, that will affect the value. I mean, I think that's super cool. And to me, it wouldn't change anything because that tells me the story of where it's
Hmm.
been. But that kind of helps me narrow things down. And if anything can be made money on, there's somebody making fakes of it out there. And
Yep.
unfortunately, so many of these are coming out of Asia, specifically China, which they are so good at faking that I've actually bought some that it took several professionals at the grading companies to look at and say, it's actually fake, but they got the silver composition right. There's no casting lines. How did they do this? It's
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it, but so it's just very much knowledge. You got to really know what you're looking at, and I've done the time to figure it out. So if anybody
Yep.
listening ever has coins like this, you can message me anytime. I answer these questions all week long. So
That's awesome. So for your Instagram, Redbeard's Relics, you share kind of like how you did in this interview. How do you choose which items that you share on your Instagram?
Well, that was a hard thing for me to start with because when I first started my page, I only was doing coins. And I quickly found that that's a very niche area of people collecting.
Sure.
And be honest, it's mostly the nerdy coin people, and it is dominated by a bunch of nerdy old guys.
Yep.
And there's a whole new, kind of, I'll call it a revival of coin collectors, younger kids, and really diverse age ranges, genders, everything, like getting into the hobby, which is really exciting. But it started with coins, and then I said, I know so many people who don't care about coins. They don't care about any of this. So
Hmm.
how can I tell a story about something to get it engaging? Well, at that point, reels on Instagram started to become a thing, and they're really trying to encourage people to do more of that. So I said, I'll give it a shot. I had just bought my first iron treasure chest, and it had a really cool intricacy to it, 2 locks, this whole thing. Just took a chance. My wife was like, just do it. I'm sure people will love it. Well, I got like 70,000 views on my first video, and I was like, okay, shoot, people really like this. All right, I'll keep going. And then I just was like, I got to keep finding weird stuff and
Yep.
cool stuff and tell the stories around it. And then I met my business partner. And my business partner, his name's Sean Rich, and he was an expert for that show Pawn Stars for about a
Sure.
hundred and something episodes. But fun fact, he provided all the props, all the weapons, and most of the costumes and stuff for the Pirates of the Caribbean films,
Oh,
and a
nice.
lot of stuff since. So if you've ever seen movies like Last of the Mohicans or Patriot, or there was a show, a really cool one called Turn, about like the spies during the Revolutionary War. He provided all these props, and he still does on anything on Netflix that's from that period. If you ever seen Outlander, that kind of
Sure.
stuff, that's what he provides. And they're all real flintlocks, real swords. And so he lives about 20 minutes from me, and I never knew. And the first time I reached out, he said, come over to my house and we can do this stuff. And so I went to his house with a handful of cash, and I ended up buying all sorts of cool stuff. And we've been friends for like the past 8 years now. And we do all this together. And I've helped grow his business, and he gives me stuff to just tell stories about and share. A really unique item, just to, in that vein, is, a sneak peek for you and your listeners.
Sure.
We got a really unique hand axe. It is from a Native American tribe from around the Quebec area to Maine and in that northeast United
Sure.
States area. The axe head is bronze, and it's most likely French made based on the style. And the handle is all carved, and the bottom of it looks like an eagle's head. And the provenance goes back
Oh.
to the French and Indian War. And
Oh,
so we're going to
wow.
be showing that off, and really talking about the whole thing. So we're really excited to go into more of these stories and kind of get to see a an area of history that's usually just kind of like earmarked in most books, and you're like,
Yep.
oh, this war happened, and then the revolution, and then the war of 1812, and it kind of
Yep.
just jumps around. But now here's a really interesting piece of that was used as a trade item for trading for furs and things like
Yep.
that. Now you get to see something with rich history, and I'm always fascinated by Native American culture
Hmm.
and that whole area. So now that we have a piece like that came out of a longtime family collection, we get to share the stories about it. So I'm
Hmm.
all about sharing a cool story, and anything that I can find that is going to, if I think it's cool, I think most likely other people will think it's neat,
Yeah.
especially when I tell you the full history.
Yep.
I'm never just going to be like, check out this key. like my post. It's going to be like,
Yeah.
hey, this is what it came from. It was used in this monastery in England, or and then going that whole thing.
Yep.
You're like, I have to have one. How much does that
Yep.
cost?
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's kind of where I try and find engaging topics and items that maybe you've never heard of, and I like to tell stories that way. So that's now I'm around 102,000 followers and growing, so I just want to keep sharing as much as I can, educating people and having fun with it.
That's awesome. So how did the History Roundtable YouTube series come about?
Yeah, so about a year ago we decided we wanted to start having more long form content. We said, well, Instagram kind of limits you on most stuff to a minute and a half,
Yep.
and a 90-second reel, I got to talk really fast or really show you something brief. And I get that that's also our day and age, that instant gratification and wanting to see something quick and keep my attention as long as possible within a short amount of time. Well, YouTube is great for getting that longer form content. And we have a really great side room that we have designed with all of these cool relics everywhere. And I sit down with Sean. My dad also is with Sean, and the three of us all kind of swap in and out when it works out. And we just want to show people really cool stuff you wouldn't normally see. I mean, especially even in a museum, and tell you all the rich history about it. So it gives me a chance to do more long form content, intricate detail on really unique stuff, and kind of go from there. So it's helped us build this platform, and we have a ton more coming. I think we're almost getting to the end of our second season. We're just about edited mostly the way through a third season. So people are liking it, and we're just going to keep doing it till it doesn't make sense anymore. So
I like the one with the little like jewelry box, like the little
mhm.
with like the you could do the key on the top and also in the front. Like that was cool. And how it's was painted, and but you wouldn't
Yeah.
know that it was painted unless like you did your research, because it doesn't look painted anymore. When you look at it, it's all faded, and that
Yeah.
was really cool. That was really cool.
Yeah, I that's probably my favorite area of any of these treasures. Are more often than not, I like trinkets. I like little boxes. I don't know anybody who doesn't think that that's kind of cool. and
Yep.
and even today, like if you go to a vintage shop and you find like an old like jewelry box, those are really really cool. And
Mm-hmm.
these chests from the 1600s, well, that's what those were. And that's coming from a time before banks existed, so you had to keep your wealth on you. And you would put personal wealth, you'd put perfumes, anything that you didn't want broken, you'd put in these chests and have them basically commissioned to get painted. A lot of them were done in the Netherlands and all made in Germany, and then traveled all over the place. But that little one is just I love it. I love the little chests, and they're often as expensive as the 250-pound chests, because who doesn't want a treasure chest on their desk?
Well, and not only
So
that, but like you said, like they have that intricate locking mechanism. So I would imagine it's much smaller than it is on like a giant chest. So it's that much more intricate on the inside as well, like almost
it
like
is.
a watch or something on the inside.
Yeah, these are these really precursors to what turned into watches later. So before we had springs, they used really thin, long ribbons of metal, wound them a ton of times around like a little bolt, and
Hmm.
that had enough spring in it to form a spring. And when you turn that key, if any of you happen to take the chance to go and check out a History Roundtable on YouTube, you'll see I turned the lock, and how one turn of the key turns about 20 pieces at the same time, and how they thought to do that. Because think about, you're working on something, you only have the daytime of sunlight to work on it, then you have to work under candlelight and strain over doing all of this stuff. So
Yep.
it just, I don't even want to think about how many hours it took to put something like that together, and how many times they broke something that was so intricate and small, and now they got to build it from scratch from raw
Yep.
metal again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to do that either. One of my last questions I'm going to ask you is, so of all the artifacts that you've found or been commissioned to find, what is one of your favorites?
Oh, to narrow it down to one of my favorites, I'm gonna give you two. I'm gonna give you a recent
Sure.
one that is
Sure.
like not as old, and then something that is very old. Probably my favorite, and I sold it, and I still regret selling it because it was so cool. Was a Lanula pendant that was found in Italy, circa around 100 to 200 AD. It was a gold pendant of a crescent moon, and it still had dirt encrusted in it. It was found around the Naples area
Sure.
and somewhere kind of in that realm. And it came out of a private collection that had been built up since the 1800s. And there's a few really well known auctions in England. And I had a customer who was looking for something like that. And they just didn't want to spend the time to look for it. And I happened to
Sure.
find one. And it was so ornate, and it was equivalent to about 16 karat gold is what they based it on. That's about as pure as they could get in
Mm-hmm.
ancient times on their gold. So it's just wonderful. It had all these little beads of gold all over it and a woven rope design with a little bail at the top you could put a cord through. And I sold it to a client that, they had to have it, didn't care the price, which I always love. It helps me get more treasures.
Yep.
That was probably my one of my favorites. There's so much shipwreck treasure and stuff, but that was probably the most unique item. And then recent years, pretty sure you're familiar with Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Well, I recently, and I've since found two more. I found a first trade printing in perfect condition of the first real in-depth map of Middle Earth. And it
Oh,
was done
wow.
in England in 1969 from an artist named Pauline Baines, who physically sat down with J.R.R. Tolkien and drew the entire map of Middle Earth together exactly how he imagined it. Now, there had been a couple that came before that were done by artists not with his, with Tolkien's actual permission, and he
Yep.
didn't like how they looked. These ones came out great. So I actually got it for a client, and he put it up in his Dungeons and Dragons room in his house in New York. And it was forever to try and source one. These are incredibly hard to find. Even worn examples, you'll spend $1,000 just on the map, not counting framing and all that. So it was a really, really wonderful example. Since then, I found the only other map she made that only covers the top part of Middle Earth from that's covered in The Hobbit. Just
Sure.
got that framed, and I just found another copy that I had framed of that map. So those are two of my favorites. I'm a huge nerd, both history wise and fantasy and books and stuff like that. So that was probably one of the coolest things, especially for that most people would know today. I love Lord of the Rings, and so I'm tempted to not even put it up for sale or make another video because I want to keep it. So
I mean, that's fair, especially if it's as difficult to find as it was. I mean, I
yeah,
would be hard pressed to part with it myself if that was me.
yeah. But those are two of my favorites right now. I've just too many things I've come across: flintlocks, swords, treasure chests, all that stuff. But for most unique, I'd say it is that pendant is probably that pendant's probably my favorite.
It sounds amazing. It sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I would like to thank Josh for joining me today. And before we go, can you tell our listeners kind of where they can find you on social media and anything else you'd like them to know about you?
Absolutely. Well, I am very active on Instagram right now. Redbeard's Relics. You could find me on History Roundtable on YouTube, and that's kind of all I do right now. But yeah, aside from that, if anyone has questions about any cool treasures, maybe you have something in your personal collection or is passed down to you from a family member and you don't know what it is, chances are I can find out what it is, specifically when it comes to coins, treasure chests, antique arms and armor. I can really find out and at least tell you a rough range of value, and I'm happy to do all of that. On top of that, I do most of this by the grace of my wife who puts up with it. No, she highly encourages it, and we love to do it together. And I just had a little girl last year, so I'm kind of doing everything I can to save all this up and get her excited about it one day. So yeah. So if you like treasure and are interested in hearing about more, check me out on Instagram, Redbeard's Relics. Ask me any questions. I'm pretty good about answering back pretty fast. So please reach out whenever you want. And again, my name is Josh. A lot of people also call me Captain Redbeard because I'm one of the only people with a red beard and who's doing this. So you can call me either one.
Well, Well, thank you again, Josh. It was so, so nice talking to you today. And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay, and we'll see you next time with another tale as old as crime.